Our last story we heard was a biography about Ray Charles. Can anybody tell me what is a biography? Did you say that a biography is real? Maybe you said it was a true story? You might have also said that it was maybe about a person's life. Those would all be correct. A biography is a real or true story about a person's life. Can anybody tell me something that they remember from our biography about Ray Charles? Did you say that he was blind? Did you say he was a famous musician? Maybe you stated that he went blind at a young age. Maybe you remembered that he used an item called Braille to help him read. Those were all correct answers. You were listening and remembering the details of our previous biography. Today, you're going to listen to another biography. A biography is a real or true story about a person's life. The person in our biography today is Helen Keller. Helen Keller was a famous writer and speaker who was blind and deaf. Do you know what deaf means? Some of you might have said yes, some of you might have said no. Deaf means that a person does not have their sense of hearing. So we now know that Helen Keller did not have her sense of sight because she was blind, and she also does not have her sense of hearing because she is deaf. As I begin our read aloud today, the biographical story about the life of Helen Keller, who was both blind and deaf. Listen carefully to find out how Helen Keller learned to talk, read, and write, even though she was deaf and blind. Close your eyes and imagine sitting in a dark room with no windows and earmuffs covering your ears so that you cannot hear anything. Imagine that you cannot see and you cannot hear anything or anyone. Imagine that you can't talk either. Now imagine that you've got to stand up and move around this dark and silent room using only your hands and feet to guide you. How would you feel if you had to stay in this room? You'd probably feel startled and frightened by everything and everyone who touched you. You'd probably feel sorry for yourself and frustrated or discouraged that you couldn't tell anyone what you were thinking or what you needed. Well, that's what life was like for a little girl named Helen Keller. Helen Keller was born a long time ago, over 150 years ago. When Helen Keller was a baby, she caught a disease that made her lose completely both her eyesight and her hearing. For the rest of her life, Helen Keller was blind and deaf. Remember, deaf means she was unable to hear, living in a world of total darkness and silence. Life was very hard for Helen Keller. As she grew up, she became frustrated and angry because not only was she blind and deaf, she wasn't able to talk or communicate with other people. She felt sorry for herself and was often mean to other people. When children tried to play with her, she broke their toys. One time she locked her mother in a room so she couldn't get out. At dinner time, Helen walked around the table, sniffing everyone's food. If she smelled something she liked on someone else's plate, she would grab it and gobble it up. Why do you think Helen acted this way as she was growing up? Did you say that maybe because she didn't know any better? That because she couldn't communicate and she liked what was on somebody else's plate by the smell of it, she decided that that's what she wanted? Helen Keller felt her way through the world, groping and fumbling through the silent darkness. Her senses of touch, smell, and taste were her only connections to the outside world. As an adult, she remembered those days by saying, I literally thought my body. The only memories she had from those years were sensations. Sensations were the feelings she got from her senses of touch, smell, and taste. She remembers that when she was really upset, she used to run outside and bury her hot face in the cool leaves and grass. Guided by her sense of smell, she would make her way through the garden until she could smell the roses and violets that calmed her down. Keller's mother and father loved her very much, but because she could not understand the world around her, she seemed disobedient and hard to control. Disobedient means Helen did not do what she was told. When she was 6, her parents hired a special teacher named Anne Sullivan to take care of Helen at home. When Anne Sullivan came to stay with the family, she figured out that Helen was behaving badly out of frustration and anger. Anne Sullivan knew that Helen could break out of her dark world if she learned to communicate with other people. But to communicate, Anne knew Helen would need to learn a lot of words. Anne Sullivan knew that because Helen couldn't hear her talk, she'd never learned what a word was. She started teaching Helen Keller words by using her fingers to write and spell them on the palm of Helen's hand. When Helen Keller splashed her hands with water, Sullivan took Helen's other hand and spelled out the letters in water. And when Helen Keller pointed to herself, Sullivan spelled out the letters in Helen. To Helen Keller, learning from Anne Sullivan was like being born a second time. Suddenly, the world was not such a confusing, frightening place. Helen Keller later said, I had been a little ghost in a no world. Now I knew my name. I was a person. I could understand people and make them understand me. For the first time, Helen had a way to tell people what she was thinking. When Helen wanted to speak to Anne, she wrote words on Anne's hand. However, it took a long time to spell out a whole sentence. Eventually, Anne taught Helen sign language so that she was able to communicate more easily with others. Sign language is a special kind of language in which a person uses only his or her hands and fingers to make signs for letters and words. People use sign language to speak to people who are deaf or hearing impaired. For Helen Keller, however, there was an extra challenge. Since she could not see, She had to feel the other person's hand while they were making the signs in order to communicate using sign language. Helen loved learning so much that Anne knew she would love reading books. Helen left home to go to a special school for blind children, and Anne Sullivan went with her. She learned to read books in Braille, a special kind of writing that uses raised dots on the page. Using Braille, Helen was able to read the words by feeling them with her fingertips. At school, she made a lot of friends and earned excellent grades. Helen was determined to succeed, and with Anne's encouragement, she graduated from both high school and college. Later in her life, Helen Keller became a famous writer and speaker. In her books and speeches, she told the remarkable story of her life. People were amazed that Miss Keller never gave up and was able to overcome the challenges of being both deaf and blind. The read aloud was a biography and told information about the life of Helen Keller. What do you recall about her life? Did you respond back with that she was blind and deaf as a baby? That she learned to communicate and read? Maybe you remembered that she became a writer and a speaker. What do you recall about her early life? Did you say that she was blind and deaf as a baby? That she seemed disobedient and hard to control? She had a special teacher named Anne Sullivan who taught her to communicate and read. Those were all great responses. What do you recall about Helen Keller as an adult? Did you say that she was a well-known writer and speaker? How did Helen communicate and read? Did you say sign language or Braille? That she had special books that were written in Braille? Braille is a special kind of writing where letters and words are written using raised dots on a page. What are some facts you learned about being blind and deaf from listening to the read aloud? Did you say that being blind and deaf means you cannot see or hear? It's difficult to communicate? Blind and deaf people use their other senses like touch, smell, and taste? Maybe you said that blind and deaf people learn to communicate through sign language. Or maybe you stated that they can learn to read Braille. Do you think the things described in this read aloud are real? Or do you think that they are fantasy meaning pretend? Did you say that they were real? If you said that they were real, you were right. This story is real because it is a biography or true story of the life of Helen Keller. I hope you enjoyed our story today, another biography about Helen Keller. As you go throughout the day, think about if you were both blind and deaf. How much harder would your everyday tasks be?